Let me set the scene for the conversation we're going to have over the next 45 or so minutes. We could choose to keep within the space bubble, or we could actually seek to be explorers and break through some of those sort of fictitious barriers we sometimes see between space and traditional non-space barrier sectors. That's what we're going to do today by talking about space-enabled healthcare. And in just a short while, I'm going to ask my colleagues on the panel to introduce themselves. But I just want to draw your attention, sort of whet your appetites, because the reality is that space represents something unique and powerful for the healthcare sector. Satellite-enabled telemedicine can serve regions that otherwise will struggle to get healthcare to their people at the time and pace that is needed. Microgravity research is accelerating pharmaceutical innovation. And there's a whole series of cutting-edge technologies that were developed for space that have real-world applications throughout healthcare and life sciences. We know that there's been work for at least the last 2 decades aboard the International Space Station. And we're proud in the UK that we have a really vibrant SME, small, medium enterprise sector that is deliberately challenging the status quo and the received wisdom on what can be done for and through space. We're seeing routes to unlocking commercial markets in space biotechnology solutions, genuinely addressing the real world healthcare projects and problems. We often talk about how space can benefit life on Earth. But I think we bring it to life when we talk about the most basic of human needs, the need to stay healthy, to have well-being. And that's what we're really going to be discussing on this panel today, whether that's astronaut health or health for people on planet Earth, on the surface. So the aim of this panel is to bring together colleagues from industry, from venture capital, from the private sector, from government, so you can hear different points of view. We want it to be a engaged and feisty discussion. We've agreed as panelists that there's going to be no physical violence, but as far as the cut and thrust of debate goes, the floor is open to you all. So we'll try and make this an interesting conversation for you all. There'll be some questions that I'll moderate, but we also want to hear from you in the final few minutes. We'll leave as much time as we can for Q&A from the floor. So please get ready with your questions. But before we're doing that, perhaps we'll just go left to right. And James, how about you introduce yourself to start with?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think you can see up on the board where I sit with 2 companies, Human Aerospace and Cape Bionics. With Human Aerospace, we're all about aerospace medicine and looking after aviation and space crews through training and regulatory avenues, but also with countermeasures to look after bone health, sensory motor degradation, fluid shifts, orthostatic intolerance and those sorts of applications. And Cape Bionics is our terrestrial application of those technologies, where we're looking to allow doctors and allied health practitioners, physios, osteos, podiatrists and so forth, the ability to scan and prescribe custom fit compression garments very easily and cheaply and practically by leveraging our experience in developing space-based countermeasures.
Very good. I think we're going to be coming back throughout this conversation how we can have terrestrial applications and space-based applications. Bob, tell us a bit more about the Luxembourg Space Agency.
Yes, so good afternoon. Bob Lamberet from Luxembourg Space Agency, where I'm leading exploration and space resources. I think space resources is a different topic than is not relevant for today. So on the exploration side, so the work we do at the Luxembourg Space Agency, we are not a traditional agency in the sense that we do not have our own missions. Our mandate is more to develop a space industry, an ecosystem of different players, and grow this industry or allow that industry to grow beyond the support we can provide to the industry. Yeah? And this can only happen through commercial opportunities. So the commercial aspect is very deeply rooted in our strategy to grow this ecosystem. And now in exploration, I think over the last 5 years, we have recently seen a lot of very promising, interesting ideas how to use this unique environment you find in LEO, and how you can use it, especially for life sciences, and that makes it very, very interesting in the long term for commercial opportunities.
Bob, thank you. And we sit around the ESA table, the European Space Agency table, as both member states. Sanjeev, just to display my own embarrassment, I was telling Sanjeev about this session. I was so pleased to see him here. I suggested he join, and he told me he was already on the panel. Sanjeev,
we'll put that down to the jet lag, right? Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Paul. So yes, Sanjeev Gordon. I'm one of the general partners of Type 1 Ventures. We are a VC firm that has presence from West Coast all the way to Japan, truly looking at space adjacent technologies and other deep tech areas across the world. We now have 1.5 billion AUM, and we literally have grown that from scratch since 2021. So really looking at how we can start seeing those next wave of the full marquee companies, SpaceX, your OpenAIs, etc., on the early stage, especially within the space and the pharma markets. I personally, and this is one of the conversations Paul and I were having outside, is I personally have been investing in space since 2016, but I'm an outsider from the space industry. And one of the things I really like about that kind of view and more people from non-space backgrounds coming into the space industry is looking at how we view different commercial opportunities, different business models, and bring that into the space industry. So with Type 1, a lot of the team pretty much come from that type of space industry, other deep tech areas, looking to really focus in on space and how we can apply that there.
Bring the capital and also the mindset.
Exactly.
Are you early stage investor, Sanjeev?
We're actually stage agnostic, so we have early stage funds right through to growth stage funds. So I joke about it, but we've done checks of 300,000 right up to 300 million.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if we end up writing any checks on the panel, that's a bonus. But Brooke, will you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about you?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Brooke Mills. I'm CEO and co-founder of Astria Technologies. And we like to think that we are a human-centric space business focused on prioritizing human healthcare in space and then looking at the ways that innovation in space can come back and translate to on-Earth applications.
Terrific. If it's okay, we'll just stick with you for a second, because we're going to talk a little bit to start with about opportunities and use cases. Could you sort of look maybe 5 years ahead and tell us what do you think the most pressing health challenges are going to be and how space-enabled health technologies are going to address those challenges? And if you can take that for space but also on Earth, so much the better.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a huge focus at the moment on humans getting back on the moon. There's ambitious goals out there to eventually put humans on Mars. So what we're going to be looking at in the future is humans are going to be in space for much longer and much further away from Earth, so outside of the protection of our magnetosphere, which means really high exposure to radiation. So that is in the healthcare that they interact with and that keeps them safe and healthy and everything while they're on their missions, but also looking into fundamentally what that's going to be doing to their DNA because of that radiation. So we really see a huge priority in these long duration missions outside of Earth's protection needing to be a huge focus for research and technologies to make sure that humans are, being put out there safely instead of just as collateral as part of space exploration.
It's a really good way of bringing to life the challenges we have at the moment, not going to be the challenges in the space for the next 5 and 10 years. You're really projecting ahead. And Bob, Luxembourg Space Agency has been one of the most focused of the agencies, and you've made a real bet on the value of working in microgravity. Can you just tell us a bit more about why you've made that bet?
It's a bit in line with what I said in the introduction, is that for this company to grow, it's extremely important to have customers beyond the traditional space agencies. I think we get to a new area where we are going to use space for different industries. So it's all about the product or service you want to deliver and the value you create for the customer. And there, the life science in microgravity is a new field that developed quite dynamically in the last 4 years. And that's where we see an opportunity. And also this whole new commercial LEO destination environment, they also will only drive when they have commercial opportunities. They need commercial customers. So we are a bit too small to now support large infrastructure development. But on our side, we believe it's extremely important to have these commercial activities on these stations. And that's where we see an opportunity for our space industry. And that's why we support these companies. And life science, I think, is clearly one of the broadest areas with very interesting ideas in microgravity.
For what it's worth, I think the identification of particular sectors, and life sciences being one of them, is probably going to be the way in which we switch on the non-space, rather than just saying space is great for everyone. So I hear what you're saying. I think it's absolutely right to focus on these particular sectors. We might move on to something else, but I want to give Sanjeev and James just a moment to react. If there's anything you wanted to add to the points that have been made so far.
I think one of the things that I'd come into is the way we talk about it to a lot of our investors who don't necessarily come from space backgrounds as well, who see the opportunity here. We talk about space as an enabling technology and an environment. It's not a sector in itself, and it should never be siloed as a sector, because a lot of the times all these different innovations that we're looking at are actually disrupting a lot of other verticals. So we're talking about here the application of space, both as an environment and the enabling technology from that into this healthcare industry. Similar situation when you think about automotive as an example. So looking at how do we better understand connectivity. That again is a situation of understanding better connectivity between satellites, that having an impact on autonomous driving. How do we look at mining, which is a huge industry here? Well, actually Earth observation data and how we process that is getting even better with things like the potential of on-edge compute power within space to better improve the speed of which we can make those decisions in space and bring that data back down. All of those things are space-enabled technologies. It's not in its own individual silo. So if we can start to reframe how we talk about the industry and actually talk about it more as an enabling technology and enabling environment, then hopefully in several years' time, this type of conference becomes a much wider conference, not just about space itself.
I think that your description of it as a domain and avoiding things as a vertical is a really good way of unlocking things. I think as a panel, you've made the case for what the opportunities are across a wide variety of other verticals. But let's got to go on then to the opportunity might be there, but that doesn't necessarily mean the path to market is an easy one. James, you might want to take this. What do you see as the kind of most important applications, and how do you balance the capabilities that are here today and the demand that's there?
Yeah, well, I certainly agree that space offers a unique environment and stimulus for developing new technologies, particularly in our field, in health and countermeasures and so forth. Microgravity invokes, deconditioning and weakness in ways that we don't see normally here. So that forces us. It's a stimulus to think in new directions and define new technologies. And perhaps an example of that is an astronaut in space in microgravity exposure. You have profound fluid shifts. So you have limb volume and segment changes. You have spinal elongation. You have severe muscle atrophy. bone calcium degradation and so forth. And the trick really is to create these countermeasures that address that deconditioning, but also to try and link that with terrestrial applications and to use that space stimulus and that where it's trying to make you pivot and think of new techniques to address that and then apply that for terrestrial application. And one of those examples might be that when you're designing a compression garment that may need to apply a certain level of compression to be effective. And you can design a perfect garment on launch, but within a very short period of time of microgravity exposure with the fluid shift and so forth, then your body shape has changed. That suit is going to be stretched in a different way, and it will not be imposing the sorts of compression that you ideally want it to have. So you need to come up with ways to be able to adjust the compression of the garment that adapts to the shape change, but in a really easy and practical way. You know, you can always inflate things or have pressure transducers, but they're always trying to move away from having to have extra hardware and extra processes and extra protocols, and because you have to use hardware, you've got to have and it's important, you have to have a backup, so you've got to send up 2 inflatable compressors and so forth. So always trying to move to a very simple and practical solution. And so, you know, we've been developing these bands which allow you to sort of a stage 1, which sort of you quickly see that the colour of your current size, you know, on a ledger on the garment, and then you stretch to that colour when you pull it through, and that incorporates all the calculations and considerations of applying compression from a tension and a size perspective. So that and it's a lot more involved than those sort of snake bites, which hopefully you don't have to use during your visit here. But you know, where you have just a rectangle on the bandage and you have to stretch it until the rectangle becomes a square. And apparently, if you've done that, then you've wrapped yourself tight enough.
Okay, I think that's a good thing for us to know for this one. But
So,
I do think there's something that you're saying here about the need to design in the microgravity environment not only helps those who are in orbit, but it changes the way in which you can think about the terrestrial application.
Absolutely. It's a new stimulus to apply, and where I was going with lymphedema and other terrestrial applications of things where that volume changes quite quickly and you need to have a certain level of compression on that. And so we're now trying to apply that adjustable band technology for terrestrial applications. So I'm sort of going back to that premise that space is that unique stimulus that allows us to pivot and think differently for terrestrial applications.
Well, maybe Sanjeev, build on this a bit, because you'll see many pictures, but fundamentally you've made the leap. You've chosen, as you were saying, as a non-space person pre-2015, 2016, to invest in space companies. What do you think it takes to do that, and how do we get more capital from the sort of non-space side into the space environment?
It's a really interesting conversation we were just having. It can vary. If you're looking at the US, they're a lot more prone to taking risk. They will throw a lot of capital at just the ideation phase. If you look at UK, Europe, it's a lot more risk averse. They want to hit a lot more milestones before they kind of see that opportunity and want to invest. But it's a key part of making that transition for us is we've invested in a lot of businesses that have shown us the long-term vision of the business and what they want to achieve, but then have also had mid-term opportunities that are going to help them achieve the longer-term vision. So if it's something in the case of, like, for example, BioOrbit, which we've invested in, BioOrbit has created a platform for protein crystallization in space. Now, it's going to take us some time to get to the ultimate scale of that type of manufacturing, but in the meantime, they know that they can be able to test using their platform, testing and getting a lot of the data back for the pharmaceutical industry. That can be then sold to them, as well as worked in some sort of partnerships with the pharmaceuticals to better understand fluid dynamics, etc. Then in addition to that, there's the crystallization as a service, when we just send up odd payloads in the meantime. So point being is a lot of the times these businesses pitch to us, we love the idea of the big vision because this is the platform to be able to do that. This is the domain to be able to shift industries. But do that from a perspective of here is the big vision, here is what we're going to be able to go for in 7, 8, 9 years. But actually, these are the stepping stones that are realistic that we can start achieving within 3 years. And that helps the investor mindset, especially outside of the US, get used to and get comfortable with taking that leap into this type of investment.
It's very interesting. You brought that to life. I thought about the way with BioOrbit, they've got that vision, and it's a wonderful vision, but they're not trying to go it alone. Yeah. And they're trying to fit in or understand where they can then add value. And I just wonder if, Brooke, will you can build on this a little bit. When you've thought about what Australia can do, how are you building in partnerships and collaborations so that you can scale?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things for us is we want to make sure that when we do it and we deploy it and people are using it, it's perfect the first time. You know, when you operate in the space environment, you only get one go. You know, if someone gets sick while they're in space, it's not like you can just quickly ship a different type of medication up to them, you know. So what we've found is by partnering with people that we know can deliver the excellence that we're also striving for and what we value in our business, it means that we get it right the first time. So, you know, my business partner and I, we have very specific skill sets and things like that we know can deliver the overall goal. But, you know, we're not experts in pharmaceuticals. So we have gone out and we've found the University of South Australia's Centre for Pharmaceutical Innovation, who are top of the line. And so we know that when we're taking the data that we've developed the technology to get, and then we're giving it to them and they're analysing it and providing the recommendations that we need, our customers are going to be getting the best of the best. And that's critical in our view.
Yeah. You make a good point. We get so used to just talking about minimal viable products and whatnot. That's not great if we're in a space environment. So that's an added challenge. Andy, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's really interesting because actually the first comment you made, which is about making sure it's right the first time, I was like, oh, well, actually, that's not necessarily how you operate. But then working with people, you do. How do you balance that? Because as an investor, we want to see, especially when we're talking about now with the cost of launch coming down, the opportunity of launch going up, we want to see more iterations and growth through iterations. How would you both manage that when it comes to dealing with people?
Yeah, that's actually, I really love that question because, of course, that's something that we've gotten when we've spoken to potential investors previously and caused one of our...
It's a live pitch. Let's go.
No pressure. It was one of the things that we iterated actually very early on in our business model because we were straight away, we're space enthusiasts, let's get us into space, and then we went, can we be doing testing here in amazing facilities like ANSTO where we can get access to radiation testing and things like that. And then that's actually when we started thinking about more terrestrial applications as well, because what you were saying before about having that long-term vision, space is the long-term vision and being able to help astronaut health. But in the meantime, while we're doing the iterations, while we're doing the Earth-based testing and things like that, we're able to iterate and create terrestrial applications for the testing that we're doing to be able to provide revenue to us while we're working on the long-term goal of astronaut health in space.
Same for you, James?
Yeah, I think for us, we're more traditional sort of fail fast, fail early, in our approach. And we've had the luxury, I guess, of looking at Earth-based microgravity analogues, such as dry immersion tests, parabolic flights, these sorts of exposures to test and iterate designs and validate designs. So we certainly agree with the premise that you can't, you need to have a validated product that's reliable when deployed on station. But we can iterate in other analog situations. Dry immersion was a really big one for us in King's College in developing some of the suits that were deployed in 2015 and 2017. They do send backup suits, which is great. So if the suit does fail, there's a backup. So there is a plan B, I guess, in a way, but you certainly don't plan for the plan B. But I think that's the real challenge, is to test it rigorously in as close as operational environment as you can, so that you generate that confidence and generate that dependability and trust, so that it will perform when it is deployed.
Yeah. Let's just spin the telescope round for a second. We've had a couple of really good insights, I think, on when you're at the company level and the extent to which you can fail fast. You'll be challenged by the space environment. We're also talking about healthcare, which has some pretty serious regulation around it itself. But let's go right on it. As a space agency, Bob, what's the role that governments and institutions like ours play when it comes to setting the policy and the funding and the regulation that allow companies like the ones we've been talking about today to really flourish?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think it's very close to a bit the goal we try to achieve in Luxembourg. That we see our role more as an enabler, as a partner to the industry. A bit also on your point that in Europe the investors are do not like to take risk. So I think we have some role to play on the public side to de-risk these early developments, to make them investable for European investors. So I think one side is help co-develop the technologies with industry, bring it to a level that the investor feel comfortable. We also learned that it's very interesting, and an exercise we started to do now is to engage very early with the investors. We let the companies we work with pitch to investors. It's a win for everybody. The VCs get to know new ideas. The companies get to know what's important to focus on to get investable, to make their product investable. And then for us, it's also interesting to hear the perspective from the investors. We are, in the end, we are not investors. We are working for agencies, so we have different perspective, different priorities when we engage with companies. Then the investors, the VCs, and in the end we need investors. So the agencies, we want to build a new industry, and this only goes with commercial ideas, with VC funding, and agencies themselves cannot achieve this. Now on your question on the policy side, I think we also, as an agency, together maybe with the broader public side, we have a role to play to make it possible for these companies to operate, to produce their products, to get their products into market. At some point, when we start producing something in space, you also have the question of import, export, taxation. You need to set the right rules and to make it attractive and feasible for these companies to operate. When it comes to this rapid testing and evolution, I think now, as we get closer to the end of the ISS, we see a shift to a new environment with multiple platforms, with more opportunities to fly, with these smaller free-flying platforms. I think the innovation will accelerate quite a lot in the next years as these platforms become more mature. We will have the larger CLDs by the end of this decade. And so I think these are all elements where the public side has a role to play, the agencies, but in the end we need to do it together.
Good. I hope you the appetite is whetted here for audience questions. In about 5 minutes' time, I'm going to throw it out to yourselves. So if you if there's something percolating in your mind, see if you can crystallise, like Biorbit would, the question that you've got. But just before you do that, there's a fact that is often highlighted in the UK system, in the main National Health Service in the UK, that the average innovation takes 17 years to fully penetrate the healthcare system. 17 years. Clearly far too long. Sanjeev, when you're thinking, you kind of pull out from the individual company level, What needs to happen so that the market is made faster than that? And what role do investors play?
On that stat alone, businesses will move out of the UK. And the scary and unfortunate part is that the barriers for the National Health Service or going into some of the more traditional businesses within the UK European environment, and also the barriers for regulation, are pretty much forcing businesses into other countries. So we have seen several of our businesses that we've invested in within the UK market not necessarily be at the advantage of or the same pace of some of its counterparts in the US because of the way it has to go through regulation and the market. What does that lead to? Amazing innovation happening in the UK and European market, but the only way they're going to scale is going over to the West or going further east. And so we want to start seeing how, from that perspective, we can really shift that up. And that's an education piece, because something like the NHS, where they've got so many other constraints, are going to be challenged in how they can implement new innovation. But there is a huge education piece and a huge bit of working with stakeholders, not in their own silos themselves, not in their own echo chambers, because those echo chambers and those consultants who come in onto those echo chambers are not helping think broader. They're thinking about the existing systems and small changes rather than huge step changes and bigger iterations. So the issue here is it's going to drive out capital, even though if we can start getting the innovation happening and that coming through, those businesses going and going to different countries is then going to have an impact on how much of that money is being pumped back into those countries.
James?
Yeah, I think large government organisations are traditionally very slow, and I don't think that's anything new. And so trying to invoke innovation and change in NHS or with national space agencies can be incredibly frustrating because they have a profound depth of protocol and administration to get through, and they tend to be extremely risk averse. I think also from a health perspective, sometimes they are compelled not to be innovative. For instance, if you have a device which would reduce the contact of a patient to a clinic, then that clinic is not necessarily wishing to employ that innovation because they get paid when that patient visits the clinic. So there are some underlying commercial aspects that are against innovation and against progress that would be considered for the patient. And I think where we're starting to see some interest here is in the private space companies, your SpaceXs and your Axioms and your Vasts and your Blue Origins, because they are not under the same level of administration and government decree. They can be more international, and they have far more of that startup bullish mentality in achieving things quickly than the established agencies, which are rooted in a slow and rigorous pathway towards achieving milestones of many years in the future.
Never felt so politely explained what the challenges of being an agency.
No fisticuffs. Yes.
But you make a great point, I think, about if you've got the incumbent, if you've got the agencies as they currently are. In some cases, I'm sure it's not true in Luxembourg or in the UK, but that it can naturally be slower, and therefore collaborating with people, and it may be very large, but have a different approach to doing business, maybe your faster route to market. Is that something you're saying, Sandhu?
There was 2 points I was going to make. Is it's a brilliant point that you raised with regards to incentives. Those incentives are not aligned for innovation. But the other point I was going to say is you mentioned 4 different companies there when you were giving examples. What a shame that all 4 of them are all US companies, right? Yes. We talk about this, we're in Australia right now with such a global kind of audience here, but all of the types of companies we use as examples are all American examples because of the way that they have been able to bust through a lot of the red tape and actually just bullishly go through innovation and get that kind of thing going a lot quicker.
Tell you what, why don't we see if there are questions from the audience? We might have Slido, but let's focus. So if anyone's got their hand up, and right there. Thank you very much as well for bringing the microphone to her.
Yes, thank you. Saviglow, BioAstra, I think about the types of work that you all do every day. It's what I do. And one of the challenges that we face in the work that we do is making space relevant to the people who haven't drank the space Kool-Aid. Even if your business model isn't selling directly to the patient or directly to the customer and you're selling B2B, for investors, not many investors haven't drunk the space Kool-Aid either. So healthcare, I think, is a really great in for making space relevant. And I'm curious if you have any personal or stories on making space relevant to the non-space drinking folks of the world.
Okay, type 1 Kool-Aid, what have we got?
Yeah. So I'm going to give an example, which actually a lot of people thought, what, this is so gimmicky. But earlier this year, we did an event in Venice in partnership with Type 1, Axiom, and Prada. And we invited a lot of people from outside the industry, outside the space industry, and they just thought, oh, okay, here we're going to a random fashion type thing just because of the marketing. And they were absolutely astonished at the fact that a fashion house like Prada employs over 70 people in its advanced materials, advanced manufacturing department to look at how they can utilize better stitching to make material more durable in space, which eventually will be rolled back out into the everyday fashion of Prada. So it's examples like that we can start taking as how can we bring those companies to look at what types of Earth terrestrial applications that they have. Let's have conversations with the likes of Eli Lilly around the table because they are clearly operating in this area, but they don't attend these kind of things as much. So how do we bring those in as stakeholders into what we're doing?
Brooke, you want to come in there?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would say is to the outsiders, when they think of space, they think, Star Wars technology, rockets, all of the hardware and software and things like that. And we need to talk about the humans. We need to talk about the humans. So we want them to know that there's people up there. So when we talk about the healthcare side of things, screw the technology. What are we doing to our humans that are going up there? What are they experiencing on a daily basis from a physical perspective, from a mental health perspective? But not only while they're up there, what happens to them when they come back? How do they get rehabilitated back after having spent 12 months in zero gravity? And that's, I think, the education piece and the conversations that aren't being had that are so relevant that brings everyone into, oh, wow, yeah, space, healthcare, humans. Yeah, we forgot about that part. That's what I would say.
Keep this going.
I think it should not be about space. It should be about what you can do in space. And people, I would say, even though space is fascinating, the majority does not really care about space industry. But they care about healthcare. So if there's a clear product or benefit of doing this in space, then they will get interested. And I think by having at some point now concrete examples of how to use space, how to grow these crystals in space, how they make the drug intake a bit more efficient, and so on. Those examples will stimulate the interest in this industry. But in the end, it will not be about the space industry, but about the health in the pharma industry.
I totally agree with that because that's how we operate. But it's also, excuse the language here, but let's make space sexy, right? Like, it is such an exciting domain, but we don't talk about it with that level of excitement. Or
a panel for it.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Let me just check. Do we have any other questions? Because this is one we can go on. But Sarah at the front. And do we have a Perfect.
Thank you. For those of us who have been weaned on the space Kool-Aid, it's a well-established relationship between microgravity in low Earth orbit and what happens on Earth. And we know that the knowledge gained in low Earth orbit has helped astronauts and has helped life on Earth. I'm interested in the panel's view on the change in nuance, because in a minute, space is also going to encompass living for a long time on the moon or very long-term travel to Mars. And I certainly heard what Brooke said about irradiation. What other aspects can we look forward to with learning things and potentially bringing product back to Earth?
Brooke.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and I love thinking about this and thinking about the human autonomy that's necessary for when you're on those long duration missions. It's by no means easy to get things up to the ISS, so please don't think that I'm saying that, but it is easier than when people are going to say be living on the moon or traveling out to Mars. So the innovation that's going to come from human autonomy to take care of themselves when it's basically impossible to get back to Earth, I think is going to be a really exciting thing coming through that I believe then can come back for terrestrial applications. In Australia, we have a lot of trouble with overpopulated triage in hospitals and things like that. So wouldn't it be amazing to be able to have a little more autonomy, say, for our paramedics to be doing diagnostics on the way to the hospital so that the triage system pulls them through a little bit more. So autonomy is something I'm excited about.
I think it's a really interesting question because one of the medical devices that we have is the gravity loading suit, and the idea is that you mimic your body weight loading on the skeleton that we have when we stand on Earth in space, so that the astronaut's body thinks that they're standing on Earth and therefore does not undergo that sort of, up to 2% bone mass per month. And one of the questions we had to ask was, well, do you have to apply 1G to stimulate the skeleton to that same degree to provoke that osteogenesis? And so we've been really interested because we obviously know a lot about 1G and we know quite a bit about 0G, but we don't know really anything about what happens in between. And we're all pretty sure that there's not just it's not just linear between 0 and 1. Maybe Mars gravity of 3/8 is enough to keep you healthy, maybe. Or when we have terrestrial applications of the skin suit for treatments, for the elderly or bedridden or sedentary or osteoporosis or recovering from orthopedic surgery or whatever, what sort of loading can we apply there to try and prevent that sort of spiral down when you're not strong enough to move, so you get weaker because you can't move? So we're really interested in that, in the response of the body at those sort of hypo-G levels, so that then we can tailor our garments and our loading devices at that sweet spot where you're getting the right amount of load with the level of practicality that you can have without having to go to a heavy, perhaps uncomfortable 1G load. And there were some studies with mice in spinning satellites looking at 3/8G exposure on hind limbs, and also hind limb suspension models where you lift the tails up a bit and only get exposed to these sort of lunar or Mars exposures. And it's fascinating, really interesting. And so I'm excited about what we're going to learn from those missions.
Well, listen, time is against us. We've probably run out of time for more questions, but just to reflect a little bit on what we've talked about. It seemed to me that the starting point of our conversation was that we're just not short of the use cases. The problem is not the scale of the opportunity, it's a feast. But as we started to explore what the routes to market, what's the way to make the pull really there, that's when we came into some of the kind of the tougher stuff, including the regulatory challenges and the fact that if we don't if we don't enable with the incentives, as you said, James, and the speed, then people will fly elsewhere. Capital is mobile and companies are increasingly mobile. So there's something that is sort of salutary about the conversation. But I think at the same time, the way we finished the conversation, really, what is it that can really challenge the way that we have been doing things and do them differently? You have a couple of great examples, James did as well, Brooke. That there's hope in that. There's something really quite special that I would just offer. That in and amongst that, we just got to some business fundamentals. That it doesn't matter that it's space. One level, it doesn't even really matter that it's healthcare. But the moment we connect with somebody's actual need, whether that need is for space medicine or that need is to not be fried in the orbital environment, when we can address someone's basic needs, then the commercial market will follow. We also need to address your needs because you need to get on to your next thing. So I think we're going to say a really big thanks to the panel. Can you put your hands together for all 4 panel members?